Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing my Swedish cardamom rolls recipe, which is sort of a cross between a cinnamon roll and a pull-apart bread. So we're going to begin by boiling some water so that we can cook 1 8-ounce russet potato, and we're going to cut that into about 1-inch pieces, and it will yield about 2/3 of a cup after being mashed, and you just want to cook it until it is nice and tender, which takes about 10 minutes. And this is going to add moisture back into the dough. So we are going to begin the dough with 1 cup of milk and 2 1/4 teaspoons of active yeast, which is also the equivalent of 1 active yeast packet. So we are going to let our yeast and milk interact, and you want your milk to be at 110 degrees so that the yeast can grow. And you want to let that sit for about 5 minutes, just until it begins to bubble a little bit. And then we are going to add in 2/3 of a cup of the mashed potato, 2/3 of a cup of sugar, 6 tablespoons of melted butter, cooled melted butter, and then we are going to add in 1 egg, along with 3.5 cups of flour, which I did by weight, and I did it in grams, so I did 400 grams of flour, just to be a little bit more accurate, since weight is more accurate than using a measuring cup. So once we have all of our ingredients in the bowl, we are going to begin mixing it all together. And then you also want to add in 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then with the dough hook attachment, we are going to let this go for about 10 to 15 minutes until the dough becomes really elastic and pliable, and it is going to be quite wet, and it is a little bit hard to work with if you don't flour your hands really heavily. So you may have been wondering why these are called Swedish cardamom rolls, and shockingly, cardamom is actually very popular in Sweden, and it's in a lot of their dishes because the Vikings found it in Constantinople and they brought it to Sweden, and ever since they have just loved the spice. So now we are going to remove our dough, and like I said, it will be fairly wet and it'll be a little bit hard to work with your hands, so you just want to keep flouring, and it's okay if it sticks to the counter a little bit. We're just trying to develop some gluten here, not too much. And as you can see, I actually had a couple chunks of potato that were kind of big, so I just grabbed them as I was doing this kneading phase. I didn't want to have chunks of potato in my dough, and you just want to continue kneading this until it becomes soft and pliable. And you could theoretically do this all by hand. It would just take a pretty long time considering how long it had to mix in the stand mixer. So then we are going to remove it from our counter. I'm just using a bench scraper just so that I can get all the dough, and then we are going to transfer it into a very well buttered bowl. And this is where we are going to let our dough proof, and we're going to let it rise for about an hour to an hour and a half in a warm place until it at least doubles in size. And while we are waiting for that to rise, I just made the filling, starting out with 6 tablespoons of butter, 1/2 cup of sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of ground cardamom, and then I did 2 teaspoons of orange zest, but I actually went back and added in some more after I mixed it, just because I wanted to have plenty of that orange flavor coming through. So then you just want to mix that together very well. And so cardamom has this sort of fruity, piney flavor. It goes very well in savory dishes, but I find that if you add honey and orange, it really brightens it, and it goes very well, and it has this nice subtle flavor that adds to the cardamom rolls. So that is the dough after about an hour and a half of rising. You can definitely see that the gluten is at work, And then I just punched down my dough, and then I put some more flour onto my work surface, and then I just turned the dough out. So now we're going to begin rolling this out into a 14 by 18 inch rectangle. It doesn't have to be perfect. I actually didn't even end up measuring my rectangle. I just sort of rolled it out as much as I could until the dough was about a 1/4 of an inch thick all around. So I just roll it out until it's nice and even, and then you want to take your filling that you made earlier and then just spread it evenly all over. And it is a pretty thin layer, but it packs a punch of flavor. So you just want to make sure that that is even all the way to the edges of your roll, except for one edge, which is where we are going to seal off the roll. So you want to roll it from the long side, and then once you've got it there, you want to seal that seam, and then we are just going to place this onto a baking sheet, and I popped it into the freezer for about 15 minutes just so that they would be a little bit more set before I cut them. So then I just buttered the tins that I was going to be using for baking the rolls, and they're actually baked individually, and they're individual portions as opposed to like a cinnamon roll, which is baked all in the same pan. So then I began to cut them, and I was making 12 rolls, so I started by cutting it in half, and then I cut it into quarters, and then I cut those quarters into thirds. And I'm using dental floss so that it doesn't misshape the roll the way that a knife would. So then once we have them all cut, you just want to place them into your tin, and then we're going to let those rise for another 1.5 hours. While that is happening, I like to make the glaze that goes on top of the buns, starting with 3 tablespoons of butter. We're going to melt that over medium heat, and then into that we are going to add 3 tablespoons of honey. And you want this to combine completely, let it bubble until it has become one mixture. The honey and the orange go really well together, and they bring out the natural sweetness of the cardamom. It also helps maintain the freshness, adding some moisture back into the rolls. So then, once our rolls have proofed, we are going to pop them into the oven at 350 degrees for about 40 to 45 minutes, or until they reach an internal temperature of 210 and they have this nice golden brown look about them. So you can see here that some of them are a little bit bigger than others, but that's not a huge deal. When I was cutting them, they weren't exactly even, but I try not to worry about it. So then we're just going to pull those out of the oven, and we're going to let them cool for about 10 to 15 minutes before we glaze them. So then I like to gently separate them with a knife, and then I generously brush them with that honey butter glaze all over all of the buns. And then to finish it off, I got this Swedish pearl sanding sugar, which are basically big chunks of sugar, and they are this beautiful white, and I think that they're just a really interesting, different take on sanding sugar that just makes your buns look a little bit more interesting. And there they are. They are so delicious, so moist, and they have a very unique flavor that we don't often have here in America. Thank you so much for watching. As always, the recipe will be in the description below, as well as on my website, bakingwithbrie.com. Feel free to leave any suggestions for future videos in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Bye!